after P. Sainath's powerful exposition of the water emergency that the country faces, the words and the phrases that he left us with is now, I think, embedded in our memories. The politics of water, the thirst economy, and water justice. It's truly, as this session is called, time to press the panic buttons. And just to sum up, I think Sainath spoke in such granular detail. I wouldn't want to go over some of the points he did, but just to sum up the crisis we face, there are close to 600 million people who, by the Niti Ayog's own admission, are water stressed, face extreme water problems. That's half of India's population. And if you look at that, nearly 70% of that water is contaminated. And if you look at the disease burden that causes, an estimated 2 lakh people die every year because of contaminated water. And if you boil that down to, if you just look at it in terms of minutes, every 3 minutes you have someone dying because of contaminated water. And as you was mentioning, ground wells, 54% of our ground wells are depleted. And that means close to 63% of our farmers and our population are going to face water stress. Now, I mean, I don't like to mention cities. As Sainath said, the problem is really, really dramatic when it comes to villages. In cities, there are close to 21 cities who will run out of groundwater by next year, not the next decade, by next year. And that includes Delhi and Bengaluru. Bengaluru is a city I grew up, Delhi is where I live, and where Param also lives. So I think the issues of water is something that we, as Sainath said, have had to have addressed yesterday. We are trying to do it today. And we have with us the redoubtable Parameshwaram Iyer, who is the Secretary, Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation in the newly created JAL Shakti ministry. I'm not sure how much Shakti that has at the moment after you look at Sainath's presentation. He is truly Mr. Toilet. He, in the last 5 years, has been primarily instrumental in constructing over 9.5 crore toilets across the country. And he's been truly, to say it very tough, in a crude manner, he has cleaned up India's shit. So let's give him a very warm round of applause for this. But now you're expected to be the rainmaker. And the first question, Param, is you built 9.5 crore toilets. Now, why didn't the government, or the Modi government, think about the water crisis simultaneously? Here you were providing toilets to the people, but there was a simultaneous water emergency. Why did it have to take the second term of Mr. Modi to declare a water emergency?
Sure. You know, first of all, Raj, Mr. Sainath is a very difficult act to follow. But at least I followed him. I was joking in terms of my dress uniform. We're both wearing khaki pants, white shirts, and a black half bangala. Now, and I think that, you know, he's painted a very grim picture. And a lot of gloomy arithmetic has been mentioned. And to answer your question on why has the water challenge been kept pending for a while, I think that there's a time and place for everything. If you look at what this government has done over the last 5 years, they have addressed basic services delivery. In fact, you might want to call it the policy of implementation. Now, whether you're talking of toilets, cooking gas, houses, bank accounts, electricity, they actually delivered services. And of course, Bijli Sadak, now you need Pani. In fact, when I took up this job 3 years ago, there was a drought again in 2016. The Prime Minister had one-on-one discussions with about 13 chief ministers of the most drought-affected states. And they got down into great detail in terms of what were the actions which needed to be taken. So water was very much on the agenda. A lot of work has been done despite, so I would, you know, I have to defer to Mr. Sainath, but I think that's a glass full empty story. There have been success stories on water conservation in Rajasthan, the Jal Swavalamban program in Maharashtra itself, Jal Yukt Shivar. There are a lot of success stories. Of course, there are big challenges ahead. And therefore, this government now, finally, Mr. Modi decided that we need to look at water in an integrated manner. So the creation of the JAL Shakti Mantralaya, which has brought together water resource management and service delivery, both for water and sanitation. So now we are starting to look at water in an integrated manner. There is also the JAL Shakti Abhiyan, which is looking precisely at water conservation, or JAL Sanchay, is looking at local level efforts to store water in that incredibly short period of the monsoon which we have. So water is very much on the agenda. And the idea and the whole point about justice and fairness, I have to tell you, all those 10 crore toilets which were built, 90% of them are for people below the poverty line, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, weaker sections. So these basic services which have been delivered over the last 5 years have gone to the weakest of the sections.
Now, how much of that, these toilets that you built, actually have water to flush them out? I mean, that's the question. A lot of the NGOs say that these toilets are great, you put up this construction, but you really don't have enough water to handle these.
Sure. And that's why this twin pit model, which for me actually is almost a Nobel Prize winning invention. In rural India, the twin pit toilet is almost like a self-contained treatment unit. You fill one pit at a time, one pit fills up, you divert to the second pit, and then the pit which is closed, you wait for a year and a half, and it becomes compost, human compost which you can use as organic fertilizer. So these toilets also have what we call the steep slope rural pan, which requires only 1.5 liters to flush, unlike the urban pan. And therefore, with half a balti of water or a couple of mugs, you can actually flush your toilet. So it is obviously more convenient to have tap water or pipe water supply in your house. It helps to sustain the whole program. But for a twin pit toilet with a steep slope, you don't require that much of water. And that's not the main reason why people don't use toilets. You need to change behavior. And I think we succeeded in doing that. I mean, the Prime Minister has always been talking about the Swachh Bharat mission as a Jan Andolan. And people took to this program, made it their own, and they changed their behavior.
So what percentage of the toilets have water?
So today, if you look at public stand posts, about 56% of the rural population have access to pipe water supply through public stand posts. If you look at house connections, it's only 18%. And that's the big challenge. And that's why the Prime Minister has announced the Jal Jeevan mission. And again, it's a big idea. It's a big disruptive idea, where to go from 18% of households in rural India which have tap connections to 100% in 5 years. And we're going to get it done. We are holding regional workshops. And this program, unlike earlier programs, will focus on 3 things. It will focus on what Mr. Sainath was talking about, which is source sustainability. So the idea is not to build a large infrastructure of pipes and there's no groundwater, because 50 to 60% of the schemes will still depend on groundwater. So how do you recharge? How do you use rainwater harvesting? All that will be mandatory. And then the reuse of grey water. Because when you provide pipe water supply to 100% of the households, an awful lot of water will come out as grey water from the kitchen and bathing. And how do you treat that? Use it again for recharging and also for agriculture. So this is an end-to-end program. It's going to be put on.
This is the Nal Se Jal program that you're talking about.
This is the Nal Se Jal program, exactly.
No, but I mean, we'll come to that. I think Sainath was also referring to the real crisis, which was farmland, water cropping, and the fact that he mentioned that you're using sugarcane, growing sugarcane in drought areas. Now, one of the main things is farm efficiency of use of water, and India figures very, very low of that, in that thing. I think out of 123 countries, we're somewhere 120 in the ranking of that. If you look at a country like Israel that really has micro-irrigation, and it is a water shortage country, and yet it is able to harvest its water. Whereas if you look at Indian statistics in terms of micro-irrigations, barely 8 to 10% of our farms. What is the revolution that the Jal Shakti ministry is planning? Can it do it, or is it a lot of hot talk that goes on this?
No, absolutely. So about 89 or 90% of water is used by agriculture. And clearly we need more efficiencies in terms of water usage and using less water intensive crops. There's no doubt about that. And that shift is already taking place. You're right, in terms of drip irrigation, we don't use too much of that. But how do you change the behavior of farmers? And you have to do it through incentives, right? It can't be done by fiat. So the JAL Shakti Abhiyan, which is currently underway, where we have over 1,200 officers, senior officers of the Government of India, they're focusing on water conservation, awareness, and understanding from farmers, rather than talking to farmers, what do they need to shift? So what does it take to get a farmer to shift from sugarcane to millet and to use less water intensive crops? So we are learning through this process. I think the main thing is there's very strong political will now to shift the agenda, to make us more efficient, and the integration of water which has taken place under the Jal Shakti Mantralaya, institutional integration, this needs to go further. And we are working closely with agriculture, we're working closely with watershed development, and we're working closely with urban. Because as you mentioned, all those pictures in urban areas, the non-revenue water or water losses in many of our cities, are upwards of 30%. If you look at the Israel, the Jerusalem utility, Hagikon, their non-revenue water is less than 10%. So there's a big scope for more efficiencies, for demand-side management. And I think that step one was integrating water. It's very much on the agenda, and now we need to look at it in a holistic manner.
Now, one of the things is it does appear to be a top-down approach. And the fact is that water is a state subject. So the central government might have apportioned 26,000 crores or whatever the budget is at the moment. I think it's around that. But yet, when it comes to implementation, it has to be the state governments that do it. So Mr. Modi and the team that he heads could say a lot about it, even pontificate about the need to have, deal with the water crisis, but really doesn't have the power to do that. How are you going to change that?
Sure. Look, we are a federal system, right? And we are talking of competitive, cooperative. We have to work in a federal system. Now, we did that in Swachh Bharat. We've done it in many other programs which have had state subjects as the driving force. Similarly, in water, no one said it was going to be easy. It's going to be much more complex than the Swachh Bharat mission. But I think there are 4 lessons we have learned from Swachh Bharat which will help us here again. And there are 4 Ps. The first P is political leadership. This was the first time a Prime Minister of India spoke about toilets and the indignity of women and girls from the Red Fort. That backing, that wind at our back made a huge difference. Public financing. So under the Swachh Bharat mission, more than $20 billion, more than 1 lakh crores. Here, the Prime Minister from the Red Fort spoke about 3.5 lakh crores. So they're putting money where their mouth is. And the third is partnerships with NGOs, with experts, bringing in people from abroad. We had a gentleman from Australia who came and spoke to us about river basin management and how Australia in a federal system learned how to divide water and get into a situation where they worked compatibly. And the fourth is people's participation. And that, when the Prime Minister talks about making this a JAL Abhiyan, that's exactly what he means. See, this program, the Jal Jeevan Mission, is a bottom-up program. It's about decentralizing water to the lowest appropriate level, getting the people involved. All the things which Mr. Sainath spoke about is how do you put them in the driver's seat, give them the resources, give them the skills, let them decide, and then it's sustainable.
Now, one of the issues is that India gets plenty of rain. Though, as Sainath points out, it comes at different intervals, not necessarily suitable. But we get an estimated 4,000 billion cubic meters of water by rainfall. Out of that, apparently, we use only about 1,000 billion cubic meters. Therefore, there is sufficient amount of water that needs to be harnessed and harvested if we have to meet this water crisis. How are we going about that? You have plenty of water, but yet it's running off into rivers, into seas. You're not able to stop it and use it for whatever, not just human beings, but creatures, as Sainath pointed out.
No, exactly. And, you can do it in one of 2 ways, and actually you can have a via media. So you can have big dams. We have 4,000 dams which can store water. They're expensive, they take a lot of time to build, and they lead to all kinds of other issues, social, environmental issues. And you can do that, or you can do local level water conservation. Jal Sanchay, that's the term, water collection. And this Jal Shakti Abhiyan is focusing precisely on that. So 256 of the most water stressed districts in India, 1,600 blocks, most of them in the western part of India. And there are 5 intervention areas there. Water conservation, rejuvenation of traditional bodies, reuse and recharge, watershed development, and intensive afforestation. So, I saw that picture where there's a forest outside the house. But over this last 3 months, there's been phenomenal movement towards water conservation. Awareness is coming about. If you see now, I don't know, India Today may be the last channel which hasn't come up with a mission Pani. Everyone else is doing it, right? You guys have done...
Arun is here.
Arun is here. You guys have done great work on sanitation. Safai Giri, big kudos. It's made a big difference. Now, water is on the agenda, but in particular, water conservation. So you can do it at a local level. It needs to be, we need to bring in more technology, better technical assistance. So it's got to be done at both levels.
Now, one of the things that the Modi government did take up was the interlinking of rivers. And I think there's something like 30 projects currently on, which is trying to link up the rivers. This was a thought that Mr. Vajpayee and much earlier also has been talked about. How practical is that? Are we just spending money down the drain? Is this going to destroy the environment, as a lot of people fear? Is it going to be useful? Will it sort our problems?
Look, what's the basic philosophy of the interlinking of rivers is to shift from a water surplus basin to a water deficient basin. Now that makes a lot of sense conceptually, but it's got a lot of practical implications. So this has been, as you said, on the anvil for a very long time. The government is looking at it again. It's got implications, environmental, societal, resettlement. So I think with all these considerations, it's going to take some time before a final decision is taken. So my sense is that we are not jumping into it for the moment.
And in terms of technology, you mentioned technology. What are the kind of, though Sainath believes that it's not a technological solution that can help us, what are some of the new technologies, like you brought with toilet and you said that's a Nobel Prize winning sort of idea. What are the kind of technologies that we can bring in to India where we can actually conserve water or use it efficiently?
Already for a very long time, space technology for aquifer mapping. So where exactly are your groundwater resources? This has been going on. The Space Organization does a brilliant job. And if you come down to the micro level, 3D village contour mapping, critical now. To know the slopes in a village, that space technology is available. So how do you design systems where when you either provide water supply or you drain it out, where is the drain slope, where's the slope of the drain? How does it reach that lowest point in the village where you can have a simple waste stabilization pond? So these technologies are being used and we are mapping it on an extensive scale.
How much have you linked up with, say, Israel and understood how they do their business, particularly drip irrigation? They brought it to the world. What else can we do with this?
They work very closely with us, actually. So they, in fact, the JAL Shakti Abhiyan, we brought together 1,300 officers who had come back from their second visit, and we had the Israeli ambassador and a whole bunch of technical people who spoke to us about water conservation, satellite mapping, and even awareness generation. Israel had this phenomenally successful awareness campaign on water conservation. Because the big difference, Raj, between sanitation and water is in sanitation, in the beginning, we were trying to market a product which really didn't have any intrinsic demand. People had been defecating in the open for centuries. So the degree of difficulty was, how do you shift that behavior? What will trigger that change? In water, everyone wants clean water in quantity, but conservation of water, that's the behavior change. And so that awareness we're bringing about, and Israel is actually helping us there.
Now, our big cities, Mumbai and Delhi and every other city, hardly 30% of the water that we use is treated. It flows into our rivers, mucks it up, downstream pollution. What are we doing about that?
Yeah, so let me give you a statistic and maybe a quiz question. So, do you know what percentage of our cities have sewer networks? Take a guess. So less than 30%. The total number of sewage treatment plants in India, less than 1,000. So most of our wastewater, or black water if you want to call it in the trade, that comes out of septic tanks. And that wastewater or black water is basically pumped out, taken in honey-sucking trucks, and typically dumped in the nearest water body. So a lot of our water bodies in and around cities are contaminated. So we are now, at least in urban areas, they're looking to moving towards decentralized treatment of sewage and going in for what we call fecal sludge management, where you have decentralized units. So one idea now, if you treat it that way, you can actually, that water is safe enough to be discharged to rivers. It could even be used for agriculture like they do in Israel. So we're moving towards that, and we are seeing wastewater as an opportunity and not as a threat.
That's an interesting point, because you talked of grey water.
Yeah.
and black water, which is interesting terminology. But what could we do, because we pump out so much of water in our city, from our cities, what could we do to have this clean? What is the technology available to it? Or we still have to go through the primary, secondary treatment plants? Are we back to, the almost 30, 40 years of technology?
Sure. In the traditional jargon, primary, secondary, tertiary treatment, I think we can leapfrog that now. And so some of these technologies, by the way, are incredibly energy intensive. Sequential batch reactors, huge plants, suck in a lot of energy, and in many plants in India are functioning at 50% capacity. So we are now trying to see whether we can utilize that capacity, bring in truck-in waste. So if you can move towards fecal sludge management, particularly in the smaller cities, provide services there. In some ways, they would also prevent the influx into cities. So there are different lower cost technologies, less energy intensive. For example, you have geo bags. Think of a huge air pillow, which can be filled in, simple treatment, and then the water which comes out of that, which used to be black water, can actually be let out to woody plants. So there are a lot of initiatives. This came from Malaysia, for example. We're learning from Israel. So I think we can leapfrog the conventional, energy intensive, very expensive investment on wastewater.
And what percentage at the moment are we recycling of wastewater? Just to give a sense of the magnitude of the problem.
See, today most of the recycling is taking place and being used for thermal units. That's the main thing today. But increasingly we are seeing in Karnataka, in UP, for example, after tertiary treatment, water is being let into canals and being used for irrigation. But Israel, about 50 to 60% of their agriculture comes from recycled, treated black water. We really need to move to that. The one thing the Prime Minister has been talking about repeatedly is, within a catchment area of say 10 to 20 kilometers around urban areas, can we treat our black water and give it to farmers who can even do horticulture with that? So this is being done in a few states, but we need to scale this up more.
The space program is actually working on recycling water for the astronauts, the Gaganaut that we're going to send up by 2022. They are going to actually drink their urine and everything else if it's processed properly. Do we have that technology available now, and do you see that happening in the next couple of years?
Look, I don't think it'll happen in the next couple of years. It's also a behavioral change thing. Singapore does it, but even in Israel, which is such a water-conscious country, when I visited there a couple of years ago, they said, listen, our black water, which is treated to a tertiary level, actually is good enough to drink, but even here we only use it for agriculture. So changing behavior, as we found out under the Swachh Bharat mission, is not easy, particularly if you have to do it at scale. And so even if the water is purified, to the nth degree, getting people to actually drink it is going to take a little more shift in behavior change.
Well, quickly, we're running out of time, but this Ganga rejuvenation program, which also comes under the JAL Shakti ministry, I've heard of it since 1985, 1986, when Rajiv Gandhi talked about it, when Seshan was in your seat. Right? That's far back, when he was not election commissioner. We still haven't got there. Every minister that comes says, I will do it in the next 3 years. What has happened to it? Where does it stand?
Sure. I'm actually speaking on behalf of my colleague, my fellow secretary who deals with it, but let me try and answer your question. I think there's been significant improvement in the water quality in the Ganga. There are two issues here. You can call it Aviral and Nirmal Dhara. So right now the focus has been more on preventing the wastewater from reaching the river. And I think that has been quite successful. There are some hotspots like in Kanpur with the leather tanneries and so on. But on the whole, there's been significant progress on preventing wastewater from reaching the river at the hotspots. Now, the focus now is on what we call e-flow, environmental flow. You need water in the river. There's an old saying in the trade, the solution to pollution is dilution. So you need more water. And if you see between Haridwar and Agra, a lot of that water goes away to irrigation in UP built by the Britishers, all that canal system. And then it picks up again from Patna with all the water coming down from Nepal. There's plenty of flow. So that problem is being addressed. We need to have more flow in the river, and that itself will take care of most of the problems.
Well, I could have gone deeper into this, but I think the final issue that we need to deal with is pricing of water. One of the big issues is that farmers have been, given free electricity. They pump more groundwater than is necessary for it. In cities, for instance, all of us actually get subsidized water. We had rejected subsidized gas. Isn't it time now that we actually begin to pay the price for water? And when we pay that price, rather than just paying a minute amount of that, we would start conserving water. Is it time now, and will the government bite the bullet on this?
No, I think the government is totally seized of the matter. And in fact, we have seen this for the last 25 years, that people are willing to pay, even poor people are willing to pay for good services. Sometimes the government and policy makers are unwilling to charge. Under the Jal Jeevan Mission, we're very clear, particularly and it's got to be affordable, of course. So what we are proposing under the Jal Jeevan Mission is that the community will pay up to 10% of the capital cost. It could be 5% in some of the weaker sections. And then this fund can actually be used for operation and maintenance. So I think there's no doubt that, look, people in Bastar, tribals are paying 100 rupees a month. When we did Swajal 20 years ago, in fact, I've got to tell you a story. So the Chief Minister was Ms. Mayawati. We went to the cabinet and we were proposing 10% of the capital cost. All the cabinet, other members said no. And then she said, गांव में मर्द लोग जुआ और शराब में पैसा खर्च करते हैं, ये तो महिलाओं का project है, and she approved it. And it was one of the most successful projects where people were running their own systems. So people are willing to pay. This government has already decided that under the Jal Jeevan Mission, it has to be affordable, but they will pay particularly for the operation and maintenance.
So you will levy a charge on water much higher than...
So again, the community has to decide. See, the point here is that using the principle, the big word of subsidiarity, lowest appropriate level, let the village water and sanitation committee decide what is that cost. They need to understand.
I'm talking cities.
Cities, again, it's up to the municipal corporations, but without a doubt, people need to pay for services.
And finally, this is a question. After, you're in charge of the entire ministry and you look at the crisis, how have you changed your habits about using water?
Okay, there's one change I've made already. There's this spray nozzle tap, so I've got that installed. And it uses, I think, less than 50% of the water. So that's a concrete change. We are trying to get that done in all government buildings and hopefully in New Moti Bagh colony as well.
And I think that's a lesson all of us have to learn. We know there's a water crisis. Each of us have to change our habits. It is not just expecting the government or anybody else to do that. We have to use less water. I was speaking to Dia Mirza the other day and she said she's got off shower water. She uses a bucket of water rather than have a shower. So these are fundamental changes we need to do in our behavior as well. But Param, we could go on. Thank you very, very much for this. You've handled it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, sir. That was a very insightful conversation. We really appreciate you having taken up the time to join us all the way in Mumbai from Delhi. Can I please invite Ms. Nandini Basu, General Manager, Corporate Communications, ITC Limited, to please present Secretary Iyer with a token of appreciation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chengappa. Well, after the water crisis, moving on to artificial intelligence, which seems like a crisis to us, but it's hopefully not. Zomato earlier this month laid off about 540 people, saying that they were automating those jobs. Well, we'll get to know a little bit more about where India is headed in the AI story. Rewiring India's thinking on automation, AI, and the workforce. May I please invite